let's illustrate a lot of the important themes around what it takes to create affordable housing and the supports for people who are low income and marginalized and let's have a walk around this example of Vancouver's evolution and Vancouver's neighborhoods where things connect and where there's frictions and often real struggles to create the housing and other social infrastructure that we really need. One is built under BC Housing or BC Homes social housing program about 1997-98. And next to it is also Vancouver Native Housing, and I think that's about 3 or 4 years old, done with BC Housing and federal government monies. And this is an example where there was support from sort of unexpected areas and challenges from unexpected areas. And my tone of voice may vary as I describe these, but I don't want you to conclude who's a villain and who's a good guy. You know, the market guys said, we welcome the non-market First Nations guys. We think it's a great idea. How can we help?
Good.
And, but there was a little bit of controversy. And this I didn't make this story up. You see that nice heritage facade when the heritage planners, man, were they keen on preserving that. But they had an important requirement, and they really dug their heels in, which was the totem pole should not be visible from the street because it detracts from the heritage facade. Any guess where this is going? Yeah. Now, if you move the totem pole back, you lose the units, which diminishes the social value. Oh, but you're talking to the heritage guys. They don't do social. They do heritage. So this was kind of resolved when some of the elders in the community came forward and said, well, we understand your settler heritage and that you're very fond, if not romanticizing it, but we kind of like our artistic heritage too. So why don't we put the totem pole on the bottom and you can put your heritage thing up in the air and it can sit on top of our stuff, dominant and dismissive the way we're used to being treated. Or maybe we could invert it and y'all can compromise. And so that's it. So again, nothing that 3 months and $50,000 of consulting time and whatever grief and heartache it would take to come to, well, I think most of you would think is a lovely conclusion. It looks great. Over to Liz.
So yeah, thanks a lot for coming on the tour. I'm going to try and not talk as much as I would normally about this building because this for me is a very important building. It was where I started my work in the downtown east side back in 1991, and at that time I had just finished working as a nurse in the emergency department in Vancouver General, and I had left because I was very frustrated about how many people coming into the emergency department who were mentally ill were also living on the street and just didn't really have the supports they needed in the community. And we were just shoveling them out of the emerge onto the street. So I ended up coming down here and knowing very little about the downtown east side, started effectively running this hotel. And after about 3 months of being in the building, people in the neighborhood found out, oh, there's a nurse working in this hotel. And so they just started sending all these really complex, sick, mentally ill, drug-addicted people, and I was 25 and very kind of naive and very Pollyanna, and I just said yes to everybody. And within about 3 months, out of the 70 rooms in the hotel, probably 98% of the people living in the hotel had injection drug use issues. Another 50% were diagnosed with a mental health issue, and everybody had had some sort of contact with the criminal justice system. So I am now writing a fellowship. I'm in a year of a fellowship year and trying to distill 23 years of experience of working in this community into what I think are some principles that worked and where we made mistakes, but what is useful for the community groups to try and learn from this experience. in particular around how drug users are seen and treated in community. And what I think was very important about this building was, even before it became renovated into what it is today, it was the first sort of act of an occupation, in a way, of a physical space where people who were so off the map and not considered human, they were demonized terribly in this community, in the media, and I think generally as drug users they were called junkies and zombies, and everywhere I go in the world, whether it's Brazil or China or everywhere, there's a nickname for people who use drugs that's very dehumanizing, and it robs them of their personhood. And strangely for us, this was just a place where we learned that people who use drugs are just people with terrible stories and terrible lives and very few social supports, and many of them came to us after horrific trauma and years of the system failing them. And so really what we did was say, okay, what can we do? We can fix a space where they can live, and we're not going to kick them out and move the problem along. We're just going to stabilize them. We're just going to try and provide stability. And that was in and of itself considered a very contentious act, because it went against a lot of the dominant beliefs and values of that time, which were, if you're going to be responsible and operate a housing project, you have to make sure people don't use drugs in your housing. Or if you're going to take care of people who use drugs, you've got to make sure that you're telling them all the time that using drugs is bad and that they should quit. So all of these other sort of messages that we were up against were very hard for us to actually just say, no, we're just actually trying to make it okay for the population to be less in crisis and access some basics that they otherwise aren't getting, like food, like healthcare, like access to some dignity. So that's what we started here, and this eventually, after many years, we were able to work with the provincial government to relocate what was at that time a very crappy SRO hotel with 70 rooms, one toilet for 19 people, one domestic shower stall for 19 people, one tiny little domestic stove for like 19 people on each of the 4 floors. So it was very substandard, in my opinion, as housing. However, it was essential and it was desperately needed. But when I started working here in 1991, this was the epicenter of a very heavily sad community. It wasn't that there was no community, there were a lot of people. There was 15,000 low-income residents in this neighborhood, 6,000 roughly of whom were injection drug users. So everything that we learned about the neighborhood was from being in this hotel for that 10-year period between 91 and 2001.
Because this is the 100 block. This is ground zero of the open drug market in the city of Vancouver. And we thought we lost that battle, but I now look at it as an opportunity. Right across the street is the Insight, and I manage all the peers that work in the chill. And what I'm having them do is they come across the street in the morning at 9 a.m. when they first open. We sweep from that end to the end here for any kind of drug paraphernalia, and then we're going to leave a little card saying you've been serviced by the Insight community team. Thank you.
So this is the injection site. It is the only, well, not now that Dr. Peters has legally been exempt, it's the only public legal supervised injection site in the entire continent of North America. And what's insane about that is seriously the only place you can walk into as a drug user and not be a criminal. So the fight to open that, though, I would just say, in spite of, and Dean will certainly share Van Du's role, what they did, but what I will like to say is that the fight to open that, in my opinion, began when we opened the Portland, because it was about the same fight, about just legitimating space for people who use drugs. And it was very contentious, and people had this idea that by allowing people who use drugs to have space, that you were somehow celebrating drug use as opposed to celebrating the lives of people who use drugs. And there's a very big distinction in my mind. In 1996, Bud Osborne came to me in the old Portland and said, we have to do something, this is ridiculous, too many people are dying. Bud was a poet, activist, drug user. He was the founder of Van Du. We stretched a 50-foot banner across Main and Hastings. We dragged out a bunch of drug users with us. Van Du didn't really even exist at that point. And we built a bunch of crosses and we stuck them all up in Oppenheimer Park, and we called it the Killing Fields Protest and the 1,000 Crosses. And in history, this is like an event that people now talk about as the beginning of the movement to open the injection site. We had a press conference. It was the first time there was national media about it. Then the next thing that happened was in the downtown East Side community, there wasn't anything but consensus around supervised injection. Drug users themselves would say to you, oh no, that would be terrible. That would be like giving candy to a baby if you let me use drugs. I have to go to treatment. So we got a grant from Health Canada and we put up a tent in Oppenheimer Park and held an event called Out of Harm's Way, where we brought in the chief of police from Frankfurt, Germany. We brought in experts from Europe and the US and Canada. Bruce Alexander, who's a professor at Simon Fraser, spoke from Canada. And they all presented different models of dealing with drug users under the rubric of what do we do about inner city drugs and crime. And 800 people from the neighborhood showed up. It was a free event. And literally the next day, the conversation in the community changed.
For the first 3 years we were open, the only thing open in that building was the injection site. And we had always wanted the detoxification center up top and the transitional housing above that so that people could be safe. But they wouldn't fund it. These politicians said, we demand treatment. Well, we want detoxes and treatment. Can we fund? They wouldn't fund it. They wanted to leave it as a standalone so that they could whip us with their political brush, that it would demonize drug users. Now that building has, as I say, the detox on the second floor, the transitional housing. We have, primary health care on the bottom floor. It is so much more than a supervised injection site. And I really get angry when people are, oh, it's the injection site. No, that's gold standard medicine that's going on there, and it's a complete way of dealing with the addict. It's not just, the injection part is so small, it just irks me. This is a medical center for addicts, and that's what it does. That's what it is.
On that side of the street is Gastown, and this side is the downtown East Side. And the building we're standing beside is the Van Horn building, which it's next to the railway right-of-way in Vancouver, and Van Horn was a builder of the CPR Railway, to celebrating some more of our settler culture. And this particular building, which is so much bigger than most of the others around here, was quite a landmark struggle and confrontation. And it's market rental. It's it's market condo, and it was built by a developer by the name of Brad Holmes, who was originally from Calgary. So what Brad Holmes said was, this would be a great place to have market condos, and the community said that's a bad idea. And what ensued was a lot of tension. Now, Liz, do you recall the controversy behind that? It was finished in 1996, and so what many folks in the neighborhood felt was an incursion and an unwarranted gentrification happened in the sort of 93, 94. And I would say on that measure, the argument, I'll do the argument that the gentrifiers would put forward, which is you get a broader mix of income, you have more affluent people, and they are going to demand better services, better policing, and that will contribute to less of marginalization of the neighborhood. The counter to that, a portion of the counter to that, is if it's causing displacement and the law enforcement is actually pushing out existing residents, then that gentrification is marginalizing and the people of the neighborhood and diminishing it. But
this area, if you look, is the railway tracks. This is actually why places like this are called Skid Row. This is where they used to skid the logs. This was all logs up here, and they used to skid it down to the water down there back in the turn of the century, 1900. And this was the actual skidway. And these tracks, this is all city property. This is public property. And it actually was a sort of a route because we don't have vehicles. This is a route from the waterfront for addicts to get right back into their city. This was the thing. And all of a sudden, these buildings that were privately owned were allowing to fence off public property. That's pissed us off.
Post Expo to about 2002, there was an equal number of social housing units built down here and market condo units built down here. So, but this was really the first market condo right in the heart of the downtown east side. And what it was doing from a marketing perspective, from a developer perspective, was demonstrating a viable market in non-traditional areas. It was not the West End, Kerrisdale, Kitsilano, but it was, you know, Railtown, Brewery Creek area, downtown. And people were saying, man, if Brad Home can sell units down in the downtown east side, and it was pretty rough down here, without a doubt, then people are going, well, maybe there's other marginal sites that we could make work, which they did. And not marginal maybe from proximity to the industry, proximity to the railway track, proximity to, you know, not as well served, not the same amenities. So it kind of broadened the horizon of conventional developers who, if you know them very well, developers make sheep look like free thinkers. So at the time that Premier Harcourt retired, he promised that the province would acquire and redevelop Woodwards, and then he left. The province paid a horrendous amount for it, and then there was a change in government from the NDP to the Liberals. At the time, there was a change in government from the NPA to Larry Campbell's coat, as he was then. And what happened was the asset was sold by the province to the city. They took a bit of a write down, we won't talk about that. And the city then had control of this and put it out for tender. Four developers competed, and West Bank won with what you have here. And Liz is going to describe everything else about this.
Or from a community development perspective, our interest in this building was that it was an entire city block, effectively, that needed some life. And it seemed that the Jim Green deals were falling through and that there wasn't really anything going on that was succeeding. So we worked with a very small architect, Sean McEwen, who is connected to the Urbanarium through Scott and other people. And just for free, Sean drew up these plans with us about this image of what we would like this to look like. And in fact, it was this basic floor plate that Gregory ended up working with when we worked with him in West Bank, because we thought it needed to connect all the parts of the city. Again, this idea of flowing through from the downtown east side to Gastown, and that it would be a symbol of connection, and that there was no reason why we couldn't have condos and social housing and space for the community and space where everybody could meet. So that was always our vision, is that this community space that we won in terms of the city had to put in this giant community space. That was a huge fight that we had, because we wanted the city-owned building to integrate some of the low-income community into the fabric of this development, other than just in the housing. So we had hoped that groups like Vandu, or groups like AIDS Vancouver, or groups like that actually did services for low-income people could be here, situated as part of the community development. And in the end, that really didn't materialize quite like that. They did pick groups that they felt, they being the city, represented the community, but they were things like, and this is not to criticize those services in any way, they're all fine. Like,
I'll criticize.
But it wasn't what our original idea was in terms of actually embedding low-income people into this. There are groups organizing all over the country to create counter-movements to NIMBY, and I think that those movements need to find voices like yours, voices of reason, educated people who can say, you know what, we as a society are just better when there's room for all of us. And the answer isn't that those people, it's us, it's all of us, because we only do as well as our, you know, I believe as a society, we only do well when we're all together, and that's what I think everybody here can take a huge role in doing. Thank you all for coming on the tour.
That was great.
It's really patient of you to have lasted so long.